Okay, so this is kind of the lightning version of the talk that I submitted to WordCamp Kansas City. So it's called Building Bots for Fun and No Profit Using WordPress. So one of the things that I kind of started off this adventure was all the examples I saw building on top of WordPress Rest Api was all kind of like theming and building a React app, all that kind of stuff on top of WordPress, which I don't really think adds a ton of value because there's already an awesome template system built into WordPress. Why replicate that? And I would argue that the kind of norms of building out themes are way more performance optimized than having a bunch of JavaScript doing the same thing when PHP is pretty fast at doing that exact same thing. So I started to think, what other applications are there for the WordPress Rest API? And then I kind of got to the point of, what if you look at this as a platform, as a service? Right now they're 25% of the web. What's going to take them to 50? And I think that's this. So a lot of the stuff that I've been working on using REST API, the end user would have absolutely no idea that what's coming at them is from a WordPress website. So this is kind of the, it's not very visible up here. This is kind of architecture that I've been running into with some of the stuff I've been building. So over here we have kind of all of our clients. And then we have some application logic here. We have WordPress core and WordPress REST. So some of my examples I'm building are it's kind of a layer for bots. So most examples we'll have today, there's kind of a short time frame, is building Slack bots. This architecture works exactly the same for Facebook Messenger bots, Twitter bots, and then we have a traditional route here, which is kind of a WordPress 3, which is going to hit WordPress core, using the same template functions. But what I find here interesting is when you can extract this layer out, you can have all this other stuff work and interact with it easily. So some of the bot stuff that I'm doing in Node just because it's inherently built for that asynchronous communication layer. So we have Slack going into Node, we have Facebook going into Node, Twitter going into Node, and then Node's actually interfacing with WordPress REST API in the backend. For one of the examples today, it's a Slack/ command, which is probably the easiest Slack integration. And all that does is you tell Slack an endpoint, and it goes and fetches data. So in this instance, it's the API directly. It doesn't need to know. So that's kind of that in a nutshell. Everything's in green's a response, blue's a request, and that's kind of how it all flows together. But the only person that knows this is WordPress is this person, which I think is the big thing with the REST API. Is you could be on Facebook interacting with a messenger bot or a page and have no idea that the content's being managed by someone in WordPress. And the nice thing about kind of building platforms and services on WordPress is you already have all the plumbing done for you. So really all these care about is the content. What this gives you out of the box is the user management, it gives you the RESTful API, it gives you the content management system, custom fields, all of that stuff that if you were going to build a custom backend for a bot, we'd have to build all that from scratch. This you don't have to, and then it gives data entry people a nice way to actually input any content in the system, manage the backend, all while our clients have no idea what's going on. So why extend the REST API? So a lot of the stuff I'm talking about today kind of goes outside of what REST API does when you install it. So what it does when you install it is it gives you predefined data structure. It gives you predefined work requests and response. So if you hit a certain URL, it's going to return you a collection, which I have up here. Really small. So, HeyKramer is the bot that I've been building, and as you can see, all of this is kind of out of the box. So right when you install the WordPress REST plugin, you get this, and this is kind of the definition of the API, which is cool because it goes through and it tells you every endpoint. It's basically self-documents itself. So it tells you every endpoint, if it's a GET or a POST request, the endpoints that it can do, all that kind of stuff. This is great, but when you want to build something that's detached from WordPress, this becomes a problem because you're kind of while it's awesome to have this out of the box, you're pigeonholed into the data that they bring back, the data that they represent. So if we go look at bringing like a single post back, one of the things I have a problem with is it's running content through the content filter through WordPress core. So when I want to post something to Slack, I don't want some of the stuff that it does when it runs through the content filter. So without extending that, I'd have to deal with having this. So the bot, the JavaScript code would have to go parse the message instead of me handling it at the PHP level. Also, in this instance, we're bringing back a lot of data that we don't really want. And then, furthermore, specifically with like a slash command, it's expecting a specific response. So if I send it back this, it's going to throw an error because it's looking for specific parameters of the JSON response that's going to return post to the Slack channel. So those are all the reasons to extend it. So we're going to look at a little bit of code here on how that actually worked.
Or we're going to watch Seinfeld.
That's the opposite of a lot. So, they used every WordPress convention possible here when designing the REST API. So they knew that people were not going to be happy with the default because every good WordPress plugin is going to provide these ways to hook into it. So they used the standard convention of hooking into WordPress stuff with hooks and actions and filters. So in order to define these custom functionality, this extension that I'm doing, I have to register these routes. Now this code is not clean by any means. It's kind of a callback hell mess because we're hooking into an action, defining a callback, and within that callback we're defining another action that hooks into another callback. So if this was something I had to maintain forever, this would be refactored. But for demonstration purposes, it works. So we hook into the action REST API init. So it's kind of like WordPress init. When REST API boots up, this is there. So we're going to go ahead and define some routes. This kind of got to my question of, and I spent way too long trying to figure out the best naming convention because I'm bringing back posts, but I'm not bringing back a single post. I'm bringing back a random post because I just want a random, when the bot responds, I just want it to ground random. So I don't want to bring back a single one. I also don't want to bring the entire query, the results from that query back to the client for it to parse because I'm adding 10 posts of data on payload when all I really want is one. So let's handle that on the server. So my naming convention became any because I really don't care what it is, I just want any. So I thought that would work. And then I defined my own namespace. So by default, WordPress has this default namespace. I don't know, you probably can't see this up here, but it's /wp-json /wp/v2, which to me, from a RESTful standpoint, is really annoying. I like that they versioned it, but I don't really need the WP in there and just some other things that I didn't like. So I set up my own namespace. So that's actually going to flow through to the URL structure that's built out. And then I say, respond to this any endpoint. And then I do a function called getRandom. So if we look at the slash code, this is what I've told Slack about. So when I go to set up a custom integration in Slack, I say, hey, when you get my slash command, send the data to this URL. And I define that here. And then that does a callback function for that is this get/command function, which should do a lot more authorization as far as making sure that this token that gets passed is actually a thing. And actually, I have to switch all these from get to post because when you try to move a Slack command into a bot to actually release to somebody, it'll only send a post, which I found out the hard way this morning when I actually tried to publish this. And then we can see here, this is one of the reasons I had to go to the extension model, is because I need to return a specific structure to Slack. So I could have put something like this at the end of a regular REST API call, but I can't just return that post object. So if you're doing a JavaScript template, you can just return a post object. It doesn't matter because you're already parsing that to display as a theme. this I need to display a specific JSON structure. So this basically says for what the Slack bot to post is the response. The response type is in channel, which means it's going to post back to the channel that Slack command was. I'm getting a little too deep in the Slack terminology, but I think you guys have all been there. So it knows that it needs to post that Slack message back to the whole channel and not just back to the person that requested it. So another good thing about the REST API extending it is it's doing this JSON serialization on demand. So if I return this array, the REST API is turning that into JSON, serializes that and sends it back out. So that's kind of the slash command, which you can see in action here. So if I pass in the command GIF, it sends back a GIF. If I pass in the command meme, it sends back the meme. And what it does on the back end, sorry, I'm jumping all over here. I have all these conditionals, and again, this isn't the best way to design a system like this, but it works for demonstration. So if it comes back as a GIF, I send it back a random GIF. If they come asking for a quote, I send back a random quote, and these are just calling these functions. And this is, again, extending the REST API gives me the ability to do this filtering on the server side, on the API side, rather than the client side. So I can send back, I can do a category name filter on a standard REST API query and say, give me every post with the category GIFs. But I really want the custom field out of that just to get sent back to the Slack channel, not the whole object. So this gives me the ability to not only send back one string of text rather than a whole class of data, it gives me the chance to do the random function and just grab the first one out of there. So that's a couple of reasons why you want to extend it when you get to that point. So we're going to go over that. So now we get back to, if we look at here, we have some bot functionality here. So at first I built this as a WordPress plugin and ran, even just with like 5 users, ran into limitations on just the synchronous nature of PHP. And then I moved that kind of logic out to Node, which I think is what Node is perfect for.
So are you running Node then on the same server as your WordPress?
No.
Okay, so it's similar.
So and since everything that I'm doing right now is basically public, I mean, you can go poke around the API right now if you wanted to query it. I didn't do any authentication because it's all public data. It's on the website.
Right.
I'm not doing anything.
Right.
And I'll show you guys a little bit of how you would do that. I have some examples all the time, but yeah. So Node's running on Heroku. In this instance, you basically create an environment variable file that holds your Slack tokens and things.
Okay.
So for slash command, that's easy, but when you actually, I'll show you this too at the end, when you actually go to distribute your Slack application, you have to do an OAuth flow. And so to implement that, I just did another extension off the WordPress API, which I'll show you in a second. So this is a Node app that basically people can go and install into their Slack channel, and it sits there and listens. So you could do all kinds of stuff. You could say, if someone mentions soup, you could throw them a soup Nazi GIF or something like that, because you're listening in real time. So it uses the Slack real-time messaging API. So when someone adds this to a channel, you basically can read everything that gets posted in there. And so there's a lot of JavaScript here. What we are really concerned about is a couple things. On message, we do a bunch of conditionals to make sure that it's a channel conversation, it's a chat message and not a direct message. Another thing I ran into is I have this is from KramerBot, or is from KramerBot function. So I created an infinite loop because the bot was talking to each other, because I wasn't making sure that the message that was getting sent to the channel wasn't to the bot. So it just exploded basically my Slack app and ran out of memory because it was just chatting back and forth with each other, which was fun. So these are all just conditionals that are just kind of prototype JavaScript objects. But the real meat of this is here, where we actually reply with content from the WordPress Rest API. So there's a Node package for the Wordpress Rest API called Wordpress Rest API. So we're using that here, and it's pretty much 3 lines of code. So I call that any endpoint that we showed you earlier that was custom defined, and then we check to see if the request was successful, and then we just use I believe this one's using the Slackbots package and just post it back to whoever posted it. So that's kind of an example of Node, and then that gets us, if we look back at this, it's kind of doing that interface. So you can add a bunch more logic in here to do kind of the natural language processing stuff and create a real bot that interacts and still pull that content from the REST API with the logic that goes in JavaScript. So you kind of have separation of concern where if you looked at that from like a line of business application, your node would be your logic. The REST API is just a backend for that to pull all the data from, which also gives us the nice management utilities. So then, next. So a few days ago, I decided, okay, let's kind of roll this out. Let's see how it is to release a Slack bot. So I went through that and then ran into the fact that you have to run an OAuth flow. So for someone to add this to their Slack channel, it has to run through OAuth. I didn't have a mechanism in place for that, and I thought, okay, that's another good chance to use the WordPress REST API. So when you go in to create a bot in Slack's side of the world, you go in to register your application, you give your bot a name, you upload an avatar, and then you say, here's my callback for a OAuth redirect. So basically, I hooked into that same action for REST API in it, and same namespace, and I defined another endpoint called OAuth. This is what Slack is going to call back. So if you look at the URL structure that just got built, it's heykramer.com/wpjson/API/OAuth, and that's what gets sent back. So it basically sends back a code. That's the user's ID, basically their token, and then that gives you access to send stuff on their behalf. So this is extremely basic. I don't actually do anything with the response at the moment. All I do is I take the code that they send, and then I do a WP remote post, and I take that same code and I post it back to their OAuth endpoint. Say, I got the code, here it is, and they check to make sure that the code's matched, and then they say, okay, you're done. Now to take this to the next step, the next iteration of this is I take this response and I store it in the WP users table, and I'd set them up as an OAuth user through there, and I put their token in there, the email address that they registered with, and the Slack team ID of the bot ID. So Slack sends back this whole code of information that if I were to take this to another iteration, I would parse that response and store it on the WordPress site for future use. But I don't really need their token to post because they've already authorized it. So that's kind of how the OAuth flow works. WP remote post works great for it, and then these are basically defined in my WP config file as constants, which I would do again. Since this is a plugin, I'd probably build an interface for the user to enter their client ID and their secret key. But for this instance, I just use those constants. And I think that is it. So here's some links if you guys want to go play with it. That gets you to the API definition, auto discovery. That's GitHub. That's the entire WordPress code base for both custom plugins and the theme that's running on the website. The bot code, if you want to look at that Node.js code, is here. And then I've written a couple little more in-depth blog post tutorials on how I did all of this stuff here. So, any questions? Sorry, I jumped around.
Very nice.
That's the gist of it.
Slack is a world of wonder.
Well, if you think between Slack and Facebook, you have the potential to reach hundreds of millions of people. So that's where, I think that as the WordPress REST API evolves, you will have the opportunity for WordPress to reach hundreds of million additional people without actually them ever knowing that it's WordPress, which is what I think takes them a little further as they. Yeah.
So the slash API URL, that when you say auto discover, it's just dumping out all the base endpoints and then whatever you've registered.
Yep. And then, so if that's a redirect because the real URL kind of sucks. But if you plug that in, then in your JavaScript as a meta tag, it will do auto discovery. And that's what WordPress will render out as an auto discovery too.
So you were talking about the Slack, and your bot is listening to what people are saying in the channel. It's not pulling for a specific Slack command. It's looking at everything and
the
then
bot
parsing
parses
each message. Okay.
So the bot parses real time as messages come in.
So when someone adds a bot to a channel, like that bot sees everything. It's not just stuff specific to the bot.
Right.
So if you install one of these, you should probably look at the terms and service and privacy policy.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Because they could feasibly just be dumping all of your data into the right.
I'm totally not thinking of evil ways to use Slack bots for
Yeah,
profit.
Because I mean, it functions essentially like a person. Because you're listening to Slack all day, and someone says, "Hey, Ethan, they want me." In the same way, the bot hears that, and it knows, like if you install Meekin or something, you say, "Hey, Meekin, schedule a meeting for tomorrow." It's like, okay,
Right.
that's
So yeah, it has access. And when you do the OAuth in fine print, it tells the user what permissions the app's requesting, but no one ever looks at those. They just say yes, install, yes. So the real-time messaging API is literally a fire hose. And so it's up to you creating a bot to do the parsing. They're not going to do it for you. There are a couple bot.ai, there's a couple platforms now and an NPM package that helps you do a lot of the natural language processing. So you can run your logic on top of it. You can give it definitions of things that you want to catch, and it does a lot of dirty work for you. Actually, because when you get into like parsing like real-time API, it turns into some other JavaScript code really fast. Pretty soon you have 10 if statements nested in because you want to see what they're talking about, make sure that it's this plus this plus that, and then it gets into the design problem. So there's a couple libraries that can wrap that for you so you can think about it. Cool. All right,